into very different communities. I mean, like I have my personal journal, and that's me talking to like my friends. Whereas like my research journal is talking in a very different voice to a very different audience. So I mean, like I would personally argue that like unless you're talking like very specific cases, like you often do have to choose like which personality you're embodying like at a given time. I mean, like I was actually talking to Henry yesterday about like how when he's getting emailed, like he's not certain like which Henry Jenkins, like these people want to talk to him, was actually specifying like what book they want to talk to him about, because he actually has like all these different fields of research which he's looked into.
Absolutely. And I was thinking that the other day when I was tagging things in Delicious, and I was thinking each of these tags is actually a different kind of view corridor for me. And in fact, this is one article, one clipping, but I'm interested in it for 5 different, because I'm 5 different creatures, each of whom. So tagging actually, and Shirky's stuff on tagging, be interesting to know whether there's some way of using tagging as a way of addressing this issue. Yeah.
2 things. First, in response to the question Colin asked, is 2 books come to mind in terms of how the internet and technologies are pushing multiplicity. One by Sherry Turkle, who's actually here at MIT, Life on the Screen, which is psychological and anthropological research into how people start creating multiple identities for themselves at once and letting them know. And another one that's more anecdotal by a guy named Julian Dibble called My Tiny Life, where he documents his experience in forming relationships with people in online buds when it was still a text-based environment almost exclusively, and how that started interfering with his understanding of who he was offline at the same time. The second thing I was going to say about that technology, I think might be playing into it, is that you were just saying that there's no space in which we're really all of our multiple identities at once, that we're in a game, choose one of them and then in sequence you can move to another one. I was just thinking of when you use instant messenger, and you're sometimes in conversations with people from different aspects of your life simultaneously, and your brain juggling them all at once, like I'll simultaneously feel that I'm different selves when I'm interacting with my parents, with my friends from here at MIT, with my undergrad friends, with my high school friends, whatever, and there's nothing more flabbergasting in a way than when you accidentally find that you typed something into the wrong box, and all of a sudden you've spoken to your parents in the wrong voice. And like, dude, yeah, I totally don't believe that. Right. Your parents are like, you totally don't believe what? I mean, but you get very comfortable in a way with holding down all of the different identities that you otherwise can segment at the same time.
And I think the linguist is... What's that?
I haven't probably typed something else into that box.
But the linguists have a body of work on code shifting, and that would be interesting to look at and see how people do that when in fact they're both Alsatian and Parisian, and they have to be able to slide back and forth.
I want to extend on the blog discussion, because I think it's an interesting way of backing into something I was thinking about the whole time we were discussing. I was just looking at your blog and thinking about the blog roll on the side, and the links to others, and then of course tags, and this way of having multiple categories of your different selves, your different bodies of interest. And I wonder if there's something about the self at this point which is more defined as situated, emerging, certainly centered in maybe multiple places, but centered in some sense, but also attached in sort of a network to others. And I wonder if maybe with throwing out postmodern thinking, that if there's a piece of that that can be salvaged, from the strand of phenomenology in which the self is situated in the world, related in various ways, always changing, but indeed, identifiable in those interactions with others. Yeah. And I don't know if work of Schutz and their subjectivity and that sort of thing plays into how you're sort of defining this extra modernist approach.
Right. I think that one of the issues here, we know, practically speaking, we're not strangers to ourselves. We don't wake up. It's not, what is that movie where the guy is reduced to writing a note, what? No, nothing in Momentum. I'm thinking about a much less interesting movie where the guy suffers amnesia every night, and he puts it, right? No.
Memento?
No, it's a.
Clearly we have a variety to choose from.
Yeah, exactly. No, he puts a thing on his mirror that says, "Your name is David Pogue." And it's a really bad movie, but it was a really nice kind of study in what happens to a man who's
Like the New
he
York
is
Times
erased every
columns?
night. What?
Like the New York Times columns?
No, I know. That's what I thought the first time. Jeez. But he has no memory, so he waits. So we never have
Columnist who can't remember who he is from one meeting to the next would be a very strange creature.
Well, that's exactly where I was headed. That's what you want to have is some cumulative, and that's the thing I'm finding about a post, about posting, is that if I sit down to write a monograph now, the exercise of a single point of view and a single voice and all the things you're obliged to do to satisfy the conventions of a book, that it's really not very interesting. But what I'm doing is posting every day with all of the variation that necessarily imposes, but not least it just lets my various voices speak, if that's not too self-dramatizing way of putting it. That body of posts ends up being much noisier, but much richer and more interesting, and much more likely, I think, to stumble upon something useful. And so that's what I'm hoping, and I think maybe that's how these posts, these blogs, when they're working, are working best. Because one of the questions is, hey, there's too much noise, there's too much variation here, there is no momentum, and that's, if that's where we come out, then the death of the self is a terrible thing. Right? People can no longer sustain, can no longer create sustained acts of discourse. God help us, because some of the problems we're looking at now are going to take sustained acts of discourse. So, but I think maybe that's what blogs do, is that they work like an alpine meadow. You know, alpine meadows start with lichen, which die and they form, and the slightly larger plants can take purchase and they grow and they die and slightly, and you just scale up until you've got very substantial evergreens. Thank you very much. But it becomes from this kind of the effect of things being allowed to work upon one another. And I think maybe that's, if for my money, if blogging is a useful kind of discourse that actually does better than single moments of reflection and creation, it'll be because they allow this multiplicity and they build this up. But that's a kind of, I was in Central Park a couple of years ago, and I was, you know that pool that's close to the Met, I don't know what it's called, but there was a magnificent wooden boat, about the size of this table, that was floating around in the boat on the pond. And it would just sail gracefully until it ran into one of the concrete barriers of the pond. But just before it would smack into the concrete, this stately man who appeared to be dressed like the chief gardener of a Connecticut estate would appear with a long stick and capture it and push it back out into the, without much precision. He would just get it back to the pond, as it were, and it would wander around until it was ready to smack in. As I sat watching this, I thought, this is what my career looks like. I do something until I'm just about to meet with disaster, and then I push it back out again. And that darn close to not, actually exercising a larger executive capacity where these various multiple cells are in touch with one another in some larger scheme. That feels to me like kind of the issue. Is that, what does that look like?
Sounds much more dialogical.
I guess, yes, yeah, or dia is maybe not, but multilogical.
Polylogical.
Polylogical, better, yes, thanks.
I have a question.
Please.
I mean, we do have a narrative that's in full force at the moment that anthropology is highly invested in.
Right.
And it comes from science. Once you map the human genome, then there are all kinds of more or less linear stories that people are starting to tell about who we are determined to be. So there's a revival about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Race is one of them in terms of a fixed identity and a behavior. And it's not by chance that it's pharmaceutical companies that are at the forefront in terms of taking advantage of, well, we can design for this group, and eventually it will be coming, designing medicines for individuals. But right now we're at this moment where I do think people are sick of postmodernism, and we're seeing some kinds of returns to a stabilizing of tribal identities and other kinds of group identities. And human genome has been an incredible form of scientific ammunition to say, but this is who you are. And anthropology has gone crazy about saying, well, this might be true. This might be who we are, and it's chartable to a certain extent. Yeah. And it's not saying who will be the fastest runner in a race, because we can live with physical descriptions about who we are potentially, it's of course things like IQ, which have to do with, it has to do with predicting behavior, not
Right.
just physical behavior.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that has any space in some of the things that you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a multiplicity within anthropology, and so you do have the people who suppose that there, one can use that kind of science. So, very interestingly, Franz Boas, the founder of cultural social anthropology, was dedicated to resisting that kind of science. And Agassi, just down the road running Harvard is his fiefdom, and to demonstrate the kinds of things that are still upon us, but come and go fashion. I'm interested in the possibility, and do you think that postmodernism, we talked about a certain cooling of our affections to postmodernism, certainly I think I see people walking away from multiplicity as part of their reaction, search for new clarities, and that'll be interesting to see. I mean, some people are plainly so terrified by the characteristics of the contemporary world that that's just where you're most comfortable. It's in the smallest box you can fit yourself into. But the rest of the world, where are they, do you think, going to end up? I mean, do you think?
Well, I mean, you've got Neil Stephenson's, what are they, the Franchelists, where you've got like the Aryan supremacists in one camp and his honorable Kentucky Fried Chicken camp. I mean, you've got the different places that are totally like ethnically divided, or you've got Cory Doctorow's tribal vision of tribes of affiliation. So, I mean, same idea.
Yeah.
People moving toward their affinity groups,
Yeah.
like banshees, but
Yeah.
different picture about how they're described.
I'm really nervous, I must say, about the tribal metaphor, because I mean, just
I didn't make it up.
no, I'm not accusing you of having done so, but I think when it's used as a way of addressing this issue, I think it's precisely. Now, I was a kid. I grew up in Vancouver, and as a kid of about 12, there were gangs in my neighborhood, and somebody came and said, "Yeah, you have to join the gang," and the notion was this was going to be a lifelong dedication, and you were going to tattoos, and I mean, it's nothing like what we think of as gang stuff now, but it was serious, kind of a lifelong commitment. It really was tribal, thank you very much. And you'd see these guys in their 30s kind of still trying to do the thing, and it was just not plausible. But it seems to me that's what nobody's going to go. If you went to a 12-year-old now and said, you have to sign up, it's like joining the mafia, or you have to give lifelong fealty to this one concept of who you are and how you want to live. I think everybody, with the exception of a few fringe groups, is just going to go, no, thank you very much. I want to be expansionary.
Gamer guilds, come on, people are signing up. They can't sign fast enough.
But don't you think they cultivate portfolio cells anyhow? Don't you think they, I mean, they may say yes.
And people leave too. I mean, like.
And people leave.
Yeah. But, yeah, Ian.
Well, I was just going to dive in a little bit, and I think one of the things I wanted to ask about, and I think it relates to this a little bit, is there's sort of thing, on the one hand, we have these multiple cells. I sort of agree that there is more of that. I mean, you can see that, I think, in, that the census allows you to check several boxes now about who you are. That there's this multiculturalism, there's a lot of language of globalization, acknowledging that it's this connection between cultures that's really the issue, not the national identity so much. And yet, one of the things that seems to be happening at the same time is a kind of, nevertheless, a search for authenticity. That it had one of the predictions, it seems to me, of postmodernism was that the notion of authenticity would wither as we come to recognize the ultimate simulacra of the world around us, and yet that search for authenticity hasn't disappeared in all sorts of ways, and yet it's sort of transformed in some ways. And I think of it often in terms of hip hop, where on one hand, authenticity is so important in the rapper who has to keep it real, and it's about being who you are. Although there's a lot of complexity in that too.
Yeah.
It's not as simple that you just have to
it's a
sort of
distributed
tell your
authenticity.
resume and then you're a good rapper. But at the same time, it's a musical culture that very much respects remixing and this idea of sampling, and that it unravels even the idea of authentic performance when it's the DJ and the mix that's actually the performance, and you see that in a lot of the rapping and the quoting of popular culture as well. And so I guess my question is, you know, is there a kind of balance here, or mirror image of the multiple self and this desire for authenticity, or is there some relationship, in your opinion, or are they kind of separate realms?
Yeah. My sense is that when there's some concern for authenticity, it's almost always authenticities. Second, it seems to me, you look at the discourse of popular culture, you look at, for instance, at punk culture, and the kinds of bitter doctrinal disputes that break out between groups of kids who live in the street and identify themselves as punk, and who decide who is authentic and who is not according to, and there are lots of ways of making that determination. What's weird is that there's always a shifter. Almost always, people are depending on the presence of a kind of shifter. They're kind of saying, authenticity, I'm the last one in to authenticity. That authenticity, you qualify for authenticity if you're as punk as I am. And anyone who's less punk than I am is inauthentic as a punk. And people shift, everyone on this scale is doing the same thing. So yes, there's a notion of authenticity, but it turns out to be fabulously multiple. It's many, many authenticities. The second thing is, when you say to people, when people say, you know, I want this connection with the real, with something substantial, and kind of like a, you know, we talk about a gold standard, or, you know, the currency metaphors seem useful here, that guarantee what's being talked, the value of what's being talked about here. If you say to them, sure, I'm prepared to say that this notion of, this presentation of yourself is authentic and it's rooted and grounded in, but you know what, there's a price. You can be this creature with this degree of authenticity, but it's going to cost you participations in other selves, in other worlds. People almost always go, no, I'm not paying that price. And so there's a hankering for it, because the stranger the world gets, the more it feels like a good place to be, when the world is still and quiet and rooted and all that stuff. But I think for most people, and clearly this is not always true, and clearly there are people living in Santa Fe. Talking to somebody the other day, and I love this phrase, and maybe somebody in the room can identify its origins, but they're talking about, oh no, this guy was talking about the urban redemption. Anybody know where that phrase is from? It's about boomers moving back, but I thought, you know, Santa Fe is a kind of suburban redemption, and it's where people go at a certain stage of their life to get in touch with, and that, and you end up with these spiritual smorgasbords, as they're sometimes called, and you get this weird tension where they're leaving whatever they were doing in Connecticut, the desperate state I'm from, and they move to Santa Fe because they want to break with all of that and get in touch with their feelings or their chakra or their colors, or, I don't mean to diminish this, but you know, it's a variety of possibilities. What's interesting is that they're almost always moving amongst these possibilities, and they're looking for authenticity in each case, but it's not like they're ever seeking a single authenticity that imposes upon them anything like what we traditionally think of as a religious discipline or purity or as an orthodoxy. That's it. Is there anybody? Yeah.
Yeah. You had talked before about you had joined Second Line.
Yeah.
So what are your observations as an anthropologist, where people present themselves in any manner that they want?
Right.
They've got infinite choices. They can be
Yeah.
furry creatures. They can be a mechanized robot. Or they could be essentially a physical representation of themselves.
Right.
What are your observations, and what have you learned?
Well, I didn't spend enough time. I wandered, John, I'm an innocent broad, maybe a nitwit broad, but I wandered into these situations that were fraught with a sexual tension I couldn't read. I mean, I knew enough about the code to know these are sexual relationships that are being set up, but I didn't really know how to think about them, and so I asked them just classically kind of stupid questions, naive questions, and that's what anthropology is good for, is making an ass of yourself, right? You know you don't know, and your job is to let other people know you don't know so they can tell you. So that's what I did, and the proceedings just stopped, and all of these avatars just looked at me, and I thought, okay, I know what that signal means. And there's no speech and staring, that means you leave. Even in a virtual world, they can do some real harm. So anyhow, I transport off somewhere in that kind of amazing way you can do in Second Life, and ding, who shows up beside me? But somebody who was kind of like a very much a second bit player in the original drama, and she's being aggressive and companionable at the same time. Not for sexual purposes, but because she wants to know why I was asking. And she was trying to be unthreatening, so being sort of nice about it, but really also kind of hostile, saying like, you should watch what sort of questions you ask. And so it was, so I have to say it was not a happy ethnographic encounter. And I didn't spend enough time to. There were some magnificently imaginative exercises. So when you sit in that little, like, I don't know what you call it, the garden area, and you get people, and you get those magnificent kinds of constellations of color and movement that are just, just wonderful. No, that's as far as I got with it. Beyond admiration and fear, I just didn't get any further. Yes.
I'm going to ask you to put on your MBA hat for a moment here, because I sort of feel that it's somewhat simplistic to blame an academic discipline for these sort of cultural shifts.
Right.
One of the things that I think of is, if we're in a moment of like capitalism and consumer culture is also driving these multiplicities. When you walk into a store and you have 10 different types of Tide, and you talk about authenticity, which is a marketing tool anymore. Because what sells better than something that's real?
Right. Right. So the question.
I'm just curious on the sort of the other viewpoint would be this is also capitalistic driven to make money. And so.
Yeah. Well, absolutely right. Well, I mean, a lot of the tech innovation stuff is clearly driven by something other than just a startup, a gleam in the eye of a startup entrepreneur. But a lot, you're absolutely right. That's what it is, and I think that's just the marketplace doing what that's one of the things that I think makes it such an interesting emergent culture and so difficult to think about for anthropological purposes is that the market is completely unsentimental about what conventions are orthodoxies. So if we want something called Second Life, and somebody can find the capital to fund it and make it work and make it pay, then it exists, even if church elders and other people are going, we're not quite certain we like. Remember we used, every newspaper article in the 50s and the 60s would consult a church elder, you never hear from them anymore. I mean, I'm sure there's like really narrowcast media in which you can hear Pat Roberts talk about, this stuff. Oh, yeah, I haven't followed that. Yeah, are they?
Where they're creating 2 soundtracks, one that's for the Christian market, one for the mainstream market.
Oh, really? Holy cow. See, that we will have lived to see, I think, that movement from a culture when everybody we were all pretty different, but we all had a clue about what was going on, broadly speaking. We might not know what's happening on Second Life, but somebody asked if a Martian ripped us off the planet and said, give me an account of your culture, we could cover off most things, And we're entering a moment where some people will always hear the Christian soundtrack, and they will live in a world, dramatically different from the one we know, and we won't be able to give anything like a comprehensive. And that's the beginning of real multiplicity. Sorry, yes, please, sir.
So, going back to the remark that we very seldom look up and don't know who you are.
Yeah.
I wonder whether the question is really about a multiple self, but maybe about performing, being a multiple self, and in real it's about masquerade, which would put a quite different question on that. On the one hand, and on the other hand, it would link up to a very deep historical tradition, down to the Baroque and even further.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, it's a question about where do we put the dividing line? Are we actors? As when actors assume roles, they may lose themselves, as they say, to the role, but they come back to themselves as the not actor, the person not acting. And sometimes that metaphor is exactly right. For some of the selves we go to, we take up as if we were taking up a dramatic role. But sometimes, and I think we were talking about this morning a little bit, people talk about this, seeing yourself in the hallway, where there's not that neat kind of compartmentalization that says, here's the me independent of some shape into which I'm shifting, and now I am shifted. It's where you just, I was telling somebody, you and I were talking about, I was playing Myst several years ago, and I was sitting in a museum Sunday afternoon playing Myst for a couple of hours. And I came out and I walked away from the building and I walked across this big boulevard in Toronto, and I looked at the street and I thought, that's really well rendered. Right? was clearly still in the game. So those are moments when you know, because I'd done everything. I'd stopped the software, I'd turned off the computer, I'd left the room, I'd left the building, I'd crossed the street, and I was still thinking, wow, that's well rendered. So I'm not sure those yeah. Yes, please.
Well, I mean, something I've been thinking about throughout just our conversation here is sort of like self for who? I mean, it seems like there's this big collapse between things like perception, identification, performance, production of self. And it seems like that range of action is sort of diminishing. And at the same time, if you think about technology, you think about in the digital world,
Yeah.
you're able
Can I
to
just
sort
say, I
of
didn't follow what your first point. What's
self for
collapsing?
who?
Self for who, right?
Yeah, so it seems sort of, I mean, it's like, are you performing, are you identifying, are
Right.
you choosing?
Right.
And it seems that sort of like in the digital world,
Right.
it's like these actions sort of start to blur. It's like you identify and you publish simultaneously. And so I'm really curious about sort of like this use of the word portfolio.
Right.
Because it seems like a portfolio is sort of at once a collection, also something you would present to someone else.
Right.
So I just sort of, I mean, I noticed you had it up there.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
that.
It was a very casually kind of chosen, metaphor. And what I sort of like about it is that it refers, of course, both to collections of stocks and bonds and to works of creative accomplishment. And that sort of covers off the Bell pragmatic individualism and an expressive individualism. Sorry.
The James G shape-shifting portfolio people uses that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love, yeah. If I could get that reference. Thanks. Yeah, so it was just that notion of a collection that is once bounded and heterogeneous within seems to be what suggested the virtue of the metaphor. But I am, to be honest. But then it's that question, what are the boundaries of this thing? When do we know that we've shifted? How mutually comprehending are the various cells, if that's the right word, of these identities within the portfolio? And I think we practice, maybe it's possible that we practice a certain amount of amnesia. The way we negotiate the differences between these cells within the portfolio is kind of forgetting that we have them. And this can take, obviously, a pathological turn, and that's the subject of lots and lots of literature. But I think minor amnesia is a strategy that we employ to negotiate the differences. And you'd think, gee, maybe you could have some, what would the larger executive's catwalk look like? That scaffolding that allowed you simultaneous access to all these different cells in the full acknowledgement of all of their screaming heterogeneity. What would that look like? And I mean, yeah. And the portfolio just says it's a collection, it's bounded, but it doesn't really get at this larger issue of, so what is agency, what is the executive agent in all of this? Sorry, it's not a very complete answer. Yes, please.
You talked about publicity and you talked about transformation. This is something you mentioned that didn't really elaborate. And it seems to me, because it affects a lot of makeover shows, the transformation is like the process of getting into publicity.
Yeah.
Is very much something that is in the air. And I was wondering how it fits into your identity.
So some of that stuff for me is distressing because it sort of plays out two of the really old-fashioned notions of transformation. One is a status transformation, right? You go from standing alone in a scheme of things through the acquisition of certain properties and knowledges, and then you become a more exalted creature for social status purposes, and that's going on. The other thing that's going on is this kind of stylistic enablement, and there's a nice relationship there where at some point in our culture, what became just as important as that status, aggrandizement, and elevation was this kind of mastery of the moment, the stylistic moment, gave you kind of cultural capital and a certain social standing. Then you get these nice status wars between people who, and in New York City is nice because these groups coexist and they admire one another, and they're not really sure who ranks higher. Like you get the venture capital people in a room who are just worth more money than God, and then you'll get kind of the artists from Soho who've just got more cultural credibility than anybody could possibly manage. Anyone could possibly manage. And there's this sense of they're kind of attracted to one another, but they're also kind of repelled because it's not clear how they stand. And what is clear is that there is no larger kind of scheme within which you could evaluate the relative standing of these two groups. Sorry, I just forgot where I was headed with that.
How transformation, please.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Okay.
So some of that stuff, some of that programming seems to me to play out some of the old-fashioned notions of transformation, where the price of stylistic or status enablement is that you forswear differences and you regress towards the mean, as it were. Right? You become, that plastic surgery one. Everyone ends up looking more like a starlet and more like one another than when they started. So they actually lose difference as a result of the transformation. But those seem to me old-fashioned kind of Western notions of transformation that are still kicking around, and there they are, making a lot of money for some networks, but they are, and to some extent they are the difference between the old media and the new media, right? They're getting played out on television, but what's happening online is second life and vast and transformations that take you from less to more, as it were.
A couple of hands over.
Yeah, please, sorry. Sorry.
How do different cultures in other parts of the world handle these two sort of almost illusory self-identities? So on the one hand, you have the one perceived, the internal perception of who you should be, the self-ideation.
Right.
And then you also have the almost equally problematic illusion to yourself of who you think that you are.
Right.
Which is almost never the same as what if you took a survey of everybody else that you know,
Yeah.
and who they thought you were, is not exactly who you think you are.
Yeah.
So we in America, this kind of manifests itself in these sort of transformation shows and all of our culture zeitgeist and all the money we throw at this problem.
Right.
How do other cultures do it? Is it as much of a problem?
Yeah, that's where I have to admit my limitations as an anthropologist. Just not really, I took graduate courses in, but I can't really speak to that with any real sophistication. Sorry. No.
Grant, before I ask you my question, I'm going to defer to Stefan, and then I'll ask my question, but I believe he had a question.
Oh, did he?
I just wanted to come back.
You think I'm coming back to you? You're wrong, Mr.
Go on. Yeah, we were talking about this metaphor of the actor as one person of brokering multiple identities. And before that, we talked about this utilitarian concept of shifting between identities. And I wonder if those, from an anthropological point of view, are mutually exclusive. Because I think, for example, if you think about online games, I think they fall together at some point. For example, there are instances which are mentioned in studies which tend to be a little episodical at times, but very revealing also, about male players who choose a female character, not because they want to act out like female personality traits, but they say that they get more presence as a newbie, a newcomer that way. And I mean, I think it's various factors coming together that way. It's probably not monocausally utilitarian or acting, and I wonder if
absolutely
other like tropes around which come together, or if you think of them as like one or the other.
Yeah. I do sometimes, and this is probably wrong, and you're right to say that I should be thinking about how these work as mutually implying. And it's too easy actually to embrace the Bellian distinction between one individual.
I wasn't criticizing. I mean, you didn't
talk
a lot about it.
No, but
I was
it's a good point.
In that, because there's an interesting article by Ted Friedman about SimCity, how players negotiate the different instances of like being the mayor or the head of the fire department and stuff like that, based on utilitarian principles actually, and at the same time constructing micro-narratives of being one person in that moment and being another in the other.
Absolutely.
And I think that reminded me that both things actually go hand in hand in a way.
Absolutely. I was doing some work for Kodak in Korea a couple of years ago, and it was interesting to watch what people were doing with, teens were doing with photographs on their phones. They were sending out clouds of photographs to people, and it was clear that they had a perfectly mutual motive going on here. They would say to you, well, this is just interesting to keep in touch with all these people from high school. When I ping the hive in this way, I keep contact, and so I could call them in 10 years and make contact. And partly they were saying, I can recover who I was in high school, because they'll be some record of me, which is a lovely kind of like, a lovely notion. But they're also saying, but if I lose my job, I now have 1,000 people who can help me look for a new one. So there was like both the pragmatic and the expressive they were distinguishing between them, but probably I had made the anthropological error of inviting first, the expressive and then the instrumental answer, and forced them to split them up. It's not good that they thought of them as distinct.
Sam.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna keep this honest, Sam.
So I really like your use of acting as a way to look at this Meryl Streep example. I think it works in academics because we've been shaped by people like Goffman to think of communication in terms of drama anyway.
Right. Yep.
But it also works for culture as a whole, because we were discussing in one of our classes yesterday how celebrity has become sort of the common cultural language. And it's the one reason people have become so obsessed with celebrities is because it's sort of a common talking point, no matter who you're trying to speak to in the culture, since everyone's become so splintered off in their interests. But I thought in acting, it seems like there's sort of three different examples, and you sort of touched on two of them. First, you've got like the John Ellis star image example of like Tom Cruise or Jack Nicholson, who in every role there's still very much Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson, but you always see all of their roles an amalgamation of one person. Then you've got like the Gene Hackman example, which is a lot like Meryl Streep. Gene Hackman says he can go to the grocery store and he doesn't have to wear a cap or anything because no one recognizes him.
His voice, though.
Yeah, but, just to see.
Yeah,
if he's in the grocery, nobody recognizes because he becomes so immersed in each role and then pulls out clean.
Yeah.
Well, the third example would be Randolph Mantooth. I don't think anybody knows who Randolph Mantooth is. He's a television actor, and he's done a lot of daytime and nighttime serials through the years. He's not recognizable in himself, but he's very much identified with the particular character. So he plays the character week for week for years on one show, then he switches to another show.
Right.
And he said when he goes out, what interests him is to see how he's going to be recognized. So like he starts a new show, and for a while people are always coming up to him saying, "Oh my gosh, you're so and so and so and so. Can I have your autograph?" Nobody knows his name. He said he gets excited the first time someone recognizes him as the character he's currently playing versus all of his old characters. So it seems like, though, that's three very different types of multiplicity. The one, like the amalgamation all at once of Tom Cruise.
Right.
The becoming immersed in each one, but not being recognized as any of Gene Hackman. Or the, like, definitely defined selves, but having no, like, collective self. So Randolph Mantooth, no one knows who he is, but they know each of his faces.
Yeah.
So I wonder, are all of these sort of true to life, to the multiplicity you're talking about? Is one mode maybe more productive to think about in terms of everyday life than the other?
I mean, I don't know, but you struck upon kind of the method here. It's kind of saying, okay, could I say this? Right? Well, but these three, there's not a distinction to be made here. There's actually three parts to this. Or does that suggest it's a four-part system? Because really we have two dimensions crossing over. That's the name of the game. And that, for me, just to make this shameless plug, or one more hit at postmodernism, that's what I don't like about postmodernism, is that you're never kind of going, well, what would happen if we said this? Okay, what if we have four distinctions here? It's not that kind of parsing out of the possibility. But I don't have an exact answer to it.
So
I think it might be a four.
All work in certain points, possibly as metaphors.
Yeah, and this is also provisional. This is for anybody who wants to sit down and start sketching out what the possibilities are, because this is pretty crude. I like to think it's crude because it's preliminary, but I might be just kidding myself. Yeah.
So the question you posed towards the end of your presentation is what possible implications this might have for commerce and culture and the intersections of them. Do you have any early thoughts on major implications or implications?
I think that one where when you start creating advertising and communications and innovations, product innovations that speak to two of the five selves we believe to occupy this segment, however we want to define that. That's a vastly more difficult kind of undertaking than the old model, which is if they're 14 and female, then that's our target.
To what extent do you think the multiplicity of different personas we take on requires that each one have its own accessories or purchase its own things or be marketed to individually, and so that you kind of find suddenly you have five target markets with
Yeah.
a single person.
Yeah. See, I don't think each of these cells wants to be, if I can speak for them now, I don't think each of these cells wants to be outfit, and that indeed, I mean, wouldn't that be a market extreme? You know, each of the internal cells now has to have its own attractive sports
no
car.
longer keeping up.
You know, keep it simple, stupid really was the rule of marketing. I never think it was quite as stupid as Stuart Buhman and other people didn't think it was, but it was pretty. But you know, this really opens things up. This really says to the advertising agency, which always wants a bigger world in which to work creatively. Yeah, well, we think, you know, the person who's going to make this purchase has one of these 15 creatures within, and here's a constellation, here's a constellation. We want copy, we want an ad that speaks to, where you speak to 4 or 5 of them in the course of 30 seconds. That starts to get interesting. And it's really going to break there are kind of rules of narrative now about how things start and how they end, and it's pretty clear in art and all that stuff. It's really going to be postmodernist in that sense of things coming and going, and you're not quite sure what you know, that's kind of what was going on. You think about it, that magnificent spot from Arnold for Volkswagen, where, you know, it was the group, people driving around, and then they just came to a stop and looked at one another and just kept driving. I mean, that's so departed from the rules of advertising as those have been crafted in the post-war period that it was just like, okay, well, what's this about? But it was powerful, I think, precisely because it wasn't in any obvious way a locked-up narrative that you could read. It was because you couldn't read it that it was engaging. And the Nike stuff with the you know, it wasn't the third time you saw that Nike Synchronicity ad, I think it was, where there's the windshield wipers. Was it Volkswagen? Was it Nike?
Yeah, that's Volkswagen.
Volkswagen, yeah. So, you know, the first and second time was sublime because you couldn't tell what the ad was about, and then the third time you figured it. Well, if you were me, it took you 3 viewings to see it, and you figured it out. Then it just sort of died. It was that first and second moment. It was like, what's this? And that's it. So, if that's what you say to your agency, I want that moment, the first 2 viewings of the Synchronicity ad. That's what I want you to do. That's when the agency is just happy as can be. I think.
To return to your previous point regarding like multiple profiles of people who are interested in a target. I mean, like, it seems to me that like, you know, like having one of those profiles might be having someone interested in the target.
Yeah.
Like but actually gonna get someone to like actually go out and purchase it like consistently probably takes connecting with like, you know, like more than like 1 or 2 of them. You want like, you know, multiple reasons why a person might actually want something. And like when you get to that point, then they're like, you know, well, I want it for, you know, just because I want it, and I want it because I want it useful to use for my job, and you know, I want video games on. Like once you hit that point, that's when it's more of that kind of sales more on security.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, like it seems that might be a useful concept to start using once you actually have a clear idea of how these concepts will work.
So, yeah, exactly. And I mean, marketing is, it's going to take forever to build these models and then forever to get them in. But once they're in, wow. I mean, I think of Arnold, but it'd be really interesting to know what people at Arnold were thinking and how they created that stuff. Or who here
I know the guy who wrote that campaign.
Yeah.
He's got his own company now in Boston.
Yeah.
After all the prizes he won with the Drivers Wanted campaign, he bought a new house. This isn't his salary, this is the prize money. He started his own, it's not called advertising anymore, I don't know what they call it, but it's modernista. An exclamation point.
That's great.
Retarded, whatever. But yeah, Drivers Wanted, that's Lance's campaign. And what they're doing with Modernista is taking that idea of trying to look at this kind of multifaceted, multi-user, multi-identity market, this potential, and also thinking about, I mean, everybody here knows this stuff already. Like, it's not just commercials; it's multi-platform in terms of how any kind of campaign happens.
And that's interesting. You think about addressing each of the 3 of the 5 cells you care about from with a different medium. That's kind of nice. Yeah. So as we academics are, you know, clutching our brows, thinking about the big issues, the world has just gone ahead and solved the problems. Guys like, and so what's his name?
I don't know what Lance's saying.
Oh, okay,
It's,
yeah.
unfortunately, it's kind of like, I can find out and I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
put you in touch, but, it's that, it's like a sitcom where everyone's just first names.
That's great.
It's Jack and Chrissy and Lance.
Yeah, exactly. And a 3-person shop, I mean, the power of the.
Oh, no,
the
no,
team.
they're 100
Oh,
person
are they?
shop.
Oh, okay.
Jack and Chrissy is Three's company.
Yeah. Oh, I see, okay. Very nice.
Yeah.
There's a firm, advertising firm in Toronto called Taxi, because their notion is they never want to get any larger than the number of people you can get in a taxi, so.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But in minivan taxis, yeah.
What's that? Thank God, because they're expanding. Yes, did you?
Oh,
Maybe should we make this the last?
Yeah, that's
I'm so
ridiculous.
sorry, that was
Yeah, 'cause
terrible.
I'm close to 2.
Yes, you did. I guess this is a question for questions. I'll pick it up on targeted marketing. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on popularity right now, all things customizing and trying to sell products on the basis
Yeah.
of letting the user decide how to
Yeah.
look.
Yeah. It's certainly one way of solving the problem, isn't it? You can't tell what it is people want, or you can't tell fast enough. You give it to them half done and
But what they want is change. They want
complete it.
it.
Yeah, and that's sometimes true, they want sheer novelty. And I think Congress did some interesting work there, allowing customization both of the shoe and of the creative, where people would make their own spots and some great stuff, which I think they then aired. I think it was in Montreal at the time, so I missed the airing of this stuff. But, yeah, so I think that's, but it's not always the lazy answer, right? And it's not just that here you solve it, you make it up for us. I think sometimes it is truly the right thing to do, because you can't be more various than the world. And on that point,
Thank you so very much.
So then there's an optimist and senior.